Great. Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
We're now live to YouTube.
Is Ariana joining us? Is everybody here, Paul?
Let me see here real quick. I do not see Ariana quite yet. No.
Gladys?
Gladys?
No, I don't see Gladys either. I see Sam. I see Steve, Jeremy, Joanne, Sylvia. Annie. Hey, Steve.
Hey.
How are you? Let's see.
I gave Ariana and Gladys a call.
Yeah, I don't see either of them. No. I can shoot a text.
You should have received an updated PowerPoint just in the last 15 minutes.
Yes.
Got it.
Got it. Thank you, Bob.
Fresh off the press.
That's right.
A lot of numbers.
I just texted them, Paul.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rena.
Could be down lines, you know.
Yeah, it was a little crazy storm we went through. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But... oh. So I have Ariana on now.
Gladys is on as well.
Okay. We should be good then, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Hello,
So
everybody.
hi Gladys, how are you? All right, so good evening, everyone.
Wait a second, we're not on TV yet.
Oh, we're not. Okay.
We're on, we're good.
We're on. Excellent. Thank you, Joanne. So good evening, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to our third completely virtual Mamaroneck Board of Education meeting. I hope everyone is out there is safe and healthy. I'm going to start out with items to be removed from the consent agenda. So items to be removed from consent agenda. So if a board member wishes to remove an item on the consent agenda for further discussion, a motion to remove item X from the consent agenda must be made. However, once a motion and second are made for the consent agenda items listed below, simple questions can be asked regarding any of them as you would normally do for individual resolutions. So we'll move on to our consent agenda. A, approval of minutes of the 4/14/19 board meeting. B, approval of personnel actions. C, approval of the treasurer's report. D, approval of budget transfers. E, acceptance of arrangements for appropriate special programs and services as recommended by the CSC CPSC. Recommended action, the Board of Education approves the recommended consent agenda items A through E as listed on the attachments and above. Do I have a motion?
So move, Gladys.
Second?
Second, Ariana.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you guys. Now we move to resolution. So A,
Just 1 second. Hold on. Could you just, for the public, could you just speak to the budget transfers briefly, Sylvia?
Sure, Rena, hi. There were 3 budget transfers and I don't have them in front of me because I have the presentation up. So I might go in the wrong order. One of them was a transfer to move funds for occupational therapy from direct services to indirect services. One of the budget transfers is for moving some funds to enable us to purchase books for children. And the third budget transfer, what was it?
Charter school transfer.
Oh yeah, that was for charter school tuition. We've received some invoices for charter school tuition and did not really respond to them because that's not typically how that's paid. So we're looking into it with the state, making sure the child is our resident. And we're asking for the budget transfer in case we do have to pay it, we'll be able to.
Okay, but you'll be following all those steps to confirm residency, et cetera, because I know this came up a couple of years ago.
Yes, we've had one other case where there was a request for tuition reimbursement. I think it was about 3 years ago.
Yeah, it was
And,
2017. Yeah.
Yes, and so we will look into the residency, but also what the request is for.
Right, and it is definitely our address. We had already checked that. We've asked for some documentation for residency. in my previous district, when I got these, I honestly ignored them because I thought they were a hoax, but this seems legitimate, but it will have to go through many tests before it gets paid.
Great.
Want to be able to pay it if we need to.
That's
Okay,
the important, that's the important part that you're on top of that. Thank you, Sylvia. That's
Thank
good. Good to
Thank
hear.
you.
Excellent. Now we have move on to a resolution. So a resolution to extend a contract for universal pre-kindergarten services with the Guidance Center of Westchester. Now therefore be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Mamaroneck Union Free School District authorizes the school district to enter into a one-year contract extension with the Guidance Center of Westchester for the 2020-2021 school year, the operation of the universal pre-kindergarten program. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education authorizes the board president to execute contract extension by way of amendment on behalf of the Board of Education. Do I have a motion?
So Steve, so moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So I just want to say, as you know, we've continually, I would say, for a very long time, received $313,000 in state aid for our UPK program. Several years ago, when we were facing budget challenges, fiscal challenges as well, we partnered with Westchester, and it's been certainly a great partnership. The program is housed at Central. And I know that Nora, we have a good relationship, a good working collaborative relationship, and we're looking forward to, again, filling all the slots. We've extended the application deadline to early May, and we're hoping to provide this program for as many students as possible in the community. We would wish the state would increase the allocation, but it's remained the same for well over a decade.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Bob. So now we'll move to the budget presentation. I'm going to remind everyone at home that once again, we're not taking live comments from the public, but that please email your questions to board@mamkschools.org. So go ahead, Bob.
Could I
So-
just interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
Before we go to the budget presentation? Typically in these meetings, we've done a few updates as to anything, any developments that are going on in the remote learning plan. Is there anything new to share since last week, or everything still?
Right. Annie, would you like to just comment on that?
Sure, thanks. Last week I reported on some of the broad brush themes of the transition from 1.0 phase of the plan to the 2.0 phase. So I would say at the elementary level, there are components of that plan that are coming online this week. Yesterday was the first day of new word study platforms for both K2 and 3-5. We're well into the collaboration between Sheldrake and Amy Vanderwater. There was a nice press release that we put together over the weekend, hopefully giving the families in the community some early taste of the writing that's coming out of that, which continues to be really rich and joyful. Definitely some growing pains. We've been hearing directly from teachers and of course from administrators and some families about glitches here and there. We're looking into right now with Zern Math, some enhancements that we need to make to the kindergarten platform, among other things. But in general, I just want to thank the board for your beautiful email to faculty that went out, I think yesterday, Paul sent on behalf of the board. And I imagine that was incredibly well received. Teachers at all three levels are working incredibly hard and with a great deal of ingenuity. I'm enjoying just being part of the weekend roundups that go out from the administrators, highlighting for teachers and for family a lot of the very imaginative ways that teachers are staying connected with kids. I would say there have been some interesting forays at all levels into synchronous experiences, sort of voluntary forays, ways of both connecting with individual children and families, but also bringing kids into contact with each other. So I'd say, we're just, I think the reality is setting in. We're now looking short term as well as beginning to wonder what long-term remote learning might possibly look like. Where will we be in June? Where will we be in September? So those questions are on everyone's mind, and we're all beginning to do a lot of research around that. But for now, I would just echo the sentiments of your note that we're incredibly grateful to teachers and also to families for really approaching this challenge with such a positive spirit. and trying to be patient, but not overly patient when things are glitchy, and let's stay in communication and see how we can troubleshoot. And I would say that's the spirit across all levels. I was just looking as we were coming online at some, Nora, I don't know if you've seen these, but Liz was sharing with me some of the messages within Transition Academy. Just beautiful messages back and forth, that human connection between teachers and kids. So we're rolling.
Annie, with the attempts at the synchronous learning, the kids that we've provided Chromebooks with, are they all now able to log into that, or are there still limitations with some of our equipment?
There are definitely some limitations. Bob and I were just speaking on the phone before the meeting. I would say that we've had, with the leadership of Jesse Dancy and Mike Sammartano, our tech coaches and support of Andrew Hess, we've had an amazing effort to ensure that all children and all families are appropriately equipped. I think as weeks go by and as plans are becoming potentially a little more elaborate at every level, we're seeing almost like a new wave of demand. It could be that that families are now seeing the challenge of having multiple children require devices across the day, whereas initially they might have answered yes, we have access on an initial survey, but now the reality, particularly in households with multiple children, is becoming challenging. That's why I think the board knows we were very cautious about embedding anything synchronous as a baseline expectation in the plan at any level. We recognized that the different circumstances that families find themselves in, and also needing to have latitude for teachers of when they're doing their planning and their broadcasting of learning plans, that they themselves need that flexibility as well. So it's kind of monitoring the temperature. I would say that teachers and students are really aching for more connection and finding very ingenious ways of trying to do that individually for small groups, and in some cases whole class synchronous experiences. We also are seeing an uptick in teachers at the high school providing office hours. So I would say there's a lot of experimentation with different formats and then seeing how that plays out. I was just speaking earlier today about one of the patterns that we're seeing at the elementary level is a majority of children actively engaged between 9 and 11 or 9 and 11:30 in the morning. Not all, but some teachers have talked about wanting to do things like synchronous meetings, class meetings, or synchronous read alouds. And we're mindful that that may work for some or many members of a class, but how do we handle it if a structure like that is not, is not able to be universally, not have universal participation? Things can be recorded, they can then be posted, kids can join subsequently. But I think we're just mindful of, on the one hand, the social emotional benefit of having these experiences, but then for children who, for whatever reason, can't participate, there's that issue of missing out on something that, so it's a balancing act at all three levels. But Bob, I don't know if you want to say more about the
Yeah, so I would say, thank you, Annie. I'd just like to add, Sam, we've distributed close to 400 devices, and that's district-wide over the last probably 4 weeks. As Annie mentioned, there seems to be now in the last few days an uptick in new requests. We realize that many of them are families that we've already provided a device and are asking for an upgrade or a second device. And we have to be mindful of that given our resources and how we account for all of the devices. But I would say that, again, as Annie has mentioned, Jesse's leadership, we surveyed and really were deliberate in ensuring that we can put devices in the hands of students, provided also a large number of hotspots for students to use for the next 3 months, and ensure that they had Wi-Fi connectivity, and then provided tutorials on how to set up the device and make sure that they can connect to learning. So it's an ongoing process, but we have full commitment to it.
So I do have a question in terms of K-2 and grades 3 to 5 gen ed rooms. Is there a baseline in terms of how much connectivity we actually have our teachers connecting with their home classes, with their class in general, whether it's, a video, checking in weekly, or is it, online read aloud that's also recorded like you'd mentioned. Is there a baseline for that, or is that, we're trying it and some people are doing it, some people aren't? And can you talk on that a little bit?
Sure. So we found training all the teachers prior to school closure in Screencastify, I think was a very, strong move on our part, because it enabled us to have, Christian, as a baseline expectation, the recording of a daily message. So at the elementary level, if that's where you're asking, it remains an expectation, sort of a baseline, as you said, that the classroom teacher is sending a daily message to families in which she or he is also outlining the day's learning plan. So that's in place as a baseline. When we talked about the shifts from 1.0 to 2.0 at the elementary level, one of the big themes was that by bringing in some external curriculum resources, things like Zern Math or the writing work with Amy Vanderwater, the theory was, or the plan was, that by reducing the amount of curriculum design that teachers were going to need to be doing individually, we were going to free up more of their time and energy to be more communicative with children and with families. And that is what I'm describing is taking a lot of different forms. So we definitely have some teachers, and I think it's important to emphasize some, because this is not a universal expectation, who are experimenting with synchronous forms of interaction. So things like a read aloud or a small group meeting around, around a curriculum topic, a guided reading group, for example. But we're very mindful that as I said before, that families are finding themselves in all kinds of circumstances. And so we are expecting the ramp up of communication and interaction, and also feedback. Part of another key element of 2.0 at the elementary is that we have the capacity now for students to be submitting more material for teacher consideration, for teacher response, feedback, et cetera. So I would say the personalized communication, but then also the academic feedback on student work are key elements of 2.0, and that's taking different forms and is ramping up. I mean, I've been on the phone with certain parents in recent days, early in 2.0, who are saying they're not yet experiencing that. And I think there is just a learning curve as different pieces of the plan are coming up to speed. I know that if we speak about Zern, there are 3 different reports that a teacher is able to get about individualized student progress within that platform. But there is a learning curve of learning how to receive that, and then how to be responsive to individual students and families. But that is the expectation. And Bob can attest, and Nora and Jeremy, we've had a number of calls in recent days with the elementary team, just touching base on each component of the plan and figuring out what support do teachers need, and how do we manage community expectations, provide the time and space for teachers to acquire skills and facility with each of these elements. But for sure, the expectation and the goal is increased connection between children and teachers, and children and each other, because I know, those of you who do have school-aged children know that one of the hardest aspects of this, on top of the academic challenges, is just students missing each other, missing their teachers and missing each other. So I've been privy to a number of the very creative ways that teachers are trying to facilitate that, with interest-based groups, that there can be a gradual release, that a teacher might orchestrate something, but then once it's in place, students and families can maintain some of those synchronous interactions on their own. So
specifically in the elementary level, the middle school kids, maybe not so much, but those little guys, they want to keep connecting,
For sure.
But anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Nora, do you want to add
We all set
anything?
for the budget presentation? Cool. Nora, do you want to just talk about your virtual CSE and where we are?
Sure. So we started virtual CSEs on Monday, and we're using WebEx. Parents have been participating. It's certainly a challenge to communicate with everybody so that they're logged on and ready and whatnot. But I would estimate by week's end, we'll have done probably 40 meetings and with full committees, which is great. We've had to reschedule a bunch, but we're moving ahead, and that's the most important thing. We're divorcing the annual review conversation about services for September from potential compensatory services. And then, the primary goal continues to be to modify, support, and even supplement what's going on in 2.0, and of course in special class instruction as well. And I've been meeting with all the special ed departments in the different buildings to really talk about what are the creative means we can use to not just help students access instruction, but the secondary goal, which is around how to manage instructional time, keep motivation up, just kind of alleviate fear of people around them getting sick, of themselves getting sick. So we're really looking more at the mental health aspect that Annie was, referring to before. But we're moving forward and appreciative of the parents' support and participation always.
And I have to say, Nora, this is on a
Okay,
little bit of a tangent. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Rena. Go
All
ahead.
right. Just being able to be, somewhat of a fly on the wall, wearing different hats as part of, your team of crisis managers. I've been so touched by the level of care and concern that's being shown for for families within this district, or those who have ties to this district through family members who are or were employees. It's an incredible group of caring individuals that really touch so many lives. So thanks to you and Bob and everybody who support this group. And I'm glad we, as a board.
I would echo that. I would just say that we have to be aware and cognizant of this public health crisis, the economic crisis, its toll on our children, our community, our teachers, our administrators, retired teachers, and community at large. And so putting things in perspective, providing avenues for ongoing support, mental health support, social emotional support, and certainly crisis support in the event, as we've seen, that members of our community and our school community have passed away for certainly over the course of the last several weeks. We've had a number of teachers who have certainly struggled with health issues as much as the community and parents. And so we do want to put things in perspective. And I do appreciate the work of our crisis team, our district team, but the work of all our employees to kind of help the entire community, but everyone who's affiliated with the school system as well.
Well said. Thank you, Bob.
So I think we're ready to move on to the PowerPoint budget presentation. I want to just kind of as a lead-in, we felt it was important to share with the board and community an update on the 1920 budget, because a lot of what we're looking at between now and end of year projections and just issues around revenue are certainly important to what we need to consider for the next fiscal year and the next school year as well. And so we want to start by talking about where we're at with 1920, some of our expectations, and move from there.
Good evening, everybody. I've got to move the pictures around my numbers. Okay.
Are you all set, Sylvia?
Yeah, I'm all set. I just can't see some of the numbers when I don't have to print this out. So we wanted to start off with an update of the 1920 budget status, the current year budget status. And very simply, and these are all projections, they make a lot of assumptions. So we had budgeted our sales tax similar to the 1819 sales tax amount. In August of 2019, the county increased the sales tax and apportioned some of that to school districts. We did not reflect that in that budget because it took place in August after the budget was adopted and voted on. So even though the sales tax for this last quarter of our fiscal year will be, reduced because of the economy, we will still end up receiving for the year more sales tax than we budgeted. So that would be an increase to our revenues. Because we have not been renting the facilities since March 5th, we are losing about $232,000 in rental of facilities. Real property taxes, that's not a result of the closure. That is the current portion of the tax certiorari payments that we make, the current year's portion refund. And then there's state aid. Now, this state aid is not state aid that we should have received yet. It is state aid that we should receive for this year in June and August and September. We don't know if we're going to get it. We don't know that we're not going to get it. So my problem is I can't see the bottom.
I can comment for you, Sylvia. So if
yeah.
you can move back to that screen. So we budgeted revenues of $139,875,230. We project our revenues are going to come in at $138,936,297.
Right. So thanks, Bob. So on the expenditure side, so there's a deficit there of almost $1 million, potential deficit. Then for the expenditure side, this is going to be a pain. Okay. It's very sensitive. I'm really sorry.
You're way ahead.
I know. Here we go. For the salaries, what I was somewhat charged with doing is starting from the projections we made at January 15th with the Finance Committee. So at January 15th, we were projecting savings of $1.2 million in salaries. And as a result of closing, there will be additional savings. We estimate and project there'll be $392,000 in savings on substitute teachers, with the elimination of the spring activities, chaperones, security, stipends. We expect a savings of $178,000, and with the elimination of overtime, we expect a savings of $128,000. So the budgeted salaries, as compared to the projected salaries, there is about a $2 million difference in savings.
Sylvia, and on the substitute teachers, I mean, these substitute teachers are only paid when they work. So it's not as if we were cutting salaries that they were already receiving. It's a per diem type salary.
Right. Our building subs are being paid, but the daily people that just get called in to work whenever, there is work and they want to work, they are not, because they're not working.
Great. So building subs are being paid.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Correct.
Thanks.
Sure. With the non-salary expenditures, we expected a deficit at January 15th. That deficit is made up mostly of the use of reserves, of the tax certiorari and the workers' comp reserves. And then there was some money in there for benefits. So when we add those expenditures to the new ones of remote learning resources and the additional custodial supplies, materials, and equipment that we've had to incur, costs we've incurred. But there will be some savings. So these savings assume that we will not reopen this year. I just want to be clear about that, because these numbers would be very different if we open on May 18th. But the security would be about $70,000. Utilities projecting about $320,000, benefits $496,000, and the transportation, if we don't have to pay any of it, which I'm not sure that that's going to be the case, but if we don't have to pay any of it, there would be a savings of $1.1 million if we don't reopen this year. It would bring our projected non-salary expenditures to $63.3 million. So what does that do? If these numbers hold true, the revenues we projected, and then the combination of the salary and non-salary expenditures, it would put us at a projected deficit of $928,000. But that includes the use of reserves. So it has a different impact on the unappropriated fund balance because we used 3.6 million of reserves to incur those expenditures. The reserve for tax certiorari to pay the tax refund payments, the reserve for encumbrances are the amounts that we brought over from the prior year. The reserve from workers' compensation, we keep increasing the budget for it, but not really spending it because it's just one case we're waiting to settle. And so we just do that every year until we settle it. And then we use the reserve for subsequent years' expenditures this year. And we had a reserve for repairs. I don't know if you remember, but it was a small amount and we just wanted to eliminate it. So we use that this year as well. So even though that there's an overall deficit, the projected increase in the unappropriated fund balance is $2,765,000. And what might we do with that? We would like to replenish the reserve for tax certiorari and set up an amount for the 1920 school year of 1.8 million, replenish the reserve for workers' compensation in the amount of 500, the same amount, 500,000, and then replenish the appropriated fund balance. As you know, we have maintained that line as a revenue line in the budget.
So before we transition, I don't know if there's any questions. If we can go back to that slide, it's important to point out that the Finance Committee back in January, as we do typically return in June, make recommendations for end of year, the tax certiorari at the 1.8 million, and making sure that we set aside a significant amount of funding to anticipate tax certs for this particular year ahead is critically important. And as we know, we've made a decision to maintain the use of $400,000 in fund balance. And I think it's important, as we've said over the last 2 years, we've been able to reduce our reliance on fund balance, going down from $3 million down to $400,000, with the goal of trying to eliminate fund balance as we build our budget. And I do remember when I started in 2010, the Board of Education and certainly members of our community, certainly finance task force, were interested in trying to eliminate use of fund balance from the budget, and we've been very successful. At the same time, we have, over the last decade, and Steve, I think, is a member of the Finance Committee, we continue to draw down on reserves, and we certainly are mindful of the use of reserves for tax certiorari and being able to fund that over time.
Right, but Bob, on the tax, obviously we're in extraordinary times here, and as we work through the budget, we will try to make sure that we're cognizant, as you said before, of just all the tolls this has on the community. And one of the options that we have is, if we don't fund the tax cert to the fullest extent, at some point we could bond for tax cert if needed. And these are, unfortunately, extraordinary times. So we,
Absolutely, that's correct. I mean, I would also say that we've continued to reduce the total reserve funds, and certainly the unappropriated use of fund balance over time. But I agree with you, and that's why we committed to the $400,000 in this particular budget.
Right.
Okay. So, any other questions about the current budget?
Yeah, I have one. I have a question. So moving forward, I know that we're now allowed to establish a reserve for both TRS and for health insurance. Are we not going to set aside funds for those two areas? Specifically TRS, which I'm a little bit, I know it's a 5-year rolling average, but I'm a little concerned about what's going to happen with that.
We did set up a reserve at the end of last year, if you remember.
I do.
So we have 500,000 sitting in there, and we can certainly, we'll have a finance committee meeting before the end of the year and certainly discuss where monies should go.
Okay.
The move to MEBCO will enable us, will require us actually to have, I guess, what they would consider collateral. So we will have some funds on kind of, in their pockets for us should we go over what we need to. So that's somewhat of a reserve as well. We had not talked about funding that this year. We can certainly have that conversation in the finance committee.
I
I mean,
think,
just-
Rena, to respond to your question, we want, as this transition to MEPCO and joining the consortium, we wanted to have a little bit of history and understand utilization and costs before we start to plan for the future.
Understood.
And just remember on these reserves, we do have the flexibility during the years to move things in and out of one reserve and into another. I mean, the thing to focus on is the total reserves we have
Correct.
in reality,
Agreed.
not the. I think there's only, I forget, there's only like one reserve that you can't easily move
That's the
things.
capital.
Yeah, capital. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was just, in looking at other districts' budgets, I was struck by, the amounts, the amount of their reserves compared with ours, meaning that ours is lower in a lot of instances than
I would agree, Rena. Not to comment on other districts, but certainly in several, certainly this year, there's been I would say an uptick in the number of districts with the change in law that have set aside money in TRS, which is a long-term strategy. We are one of a few districts that have a limited amount of appropriated fund balance to fund the following year's budget. And so we, believe strongly that being able to budget and use the funds that taxpayers have provided for those purposes is the appropriate approach. And Sylvia has kind of brought that discipline into the organization the last 2 years. And we've been able to manage with a lot of unforeseen challenges around managing the budget across the year.
Great.
Also, the other thing to remember is the reason why our reserves have declined while others have gone up is the flaw in the tax cap is as districts have had declining enrollment,
Right.
their budgets are in essence less, and then they are able to store some money in a variety of different reserves, which we haven't had that flexibility.
Great point, Steve. Yeah.
So I want to transition and kind of bring us back to the beginning. That is when I had the opportunity to share my recommended budget for the community. I wanted to just remind the board and certainly our viewing community of what goes into our budget, where and how we set priorities. If you recall back in March, I had the opportunity to just focus on our district mission statement. And this really speaks to what I would say is the alignment of purposes. I would say, live this mission statement each day, even in the unprecedented circumstances of a public health crisis. We and Annie started to speak to this in an update on remote learning. We want students to kind of look forward to learning for the inherent benefit of what does it mean to be an educated person in society. Certainly, even in times that are uncertain, we want to continue to focus on preparing students for the future and give them the greatest opportunity to thrive as adults and be a part and connected to a multicultural world, which, as we've seen in the last several months, that anything that happens across the globe, it impacts all of us all the time. And so we are connected and we need to ensure that our students be able to prepare for it. And that is the beginning premise of this budget. In addition to this kind of guiding light of our mission statement, if we can move ahead, Sylvia, please. We also believe strongly in educating the whole child, that we certainly, and again, talked about this, and it's part of our remote learning plan as much as it is the day-to-day of regular school, is focus on the hearts and minds of our students to kind of certainly make sure that we set aside and create opportunities for students to become aware of what does it mean to be a part of a community, a school community, a broader community, a region, a state, and a country? How do we provide students with the social emotional well-being and that balanced set of characteristics and qualities that make them responsible citizens? And so nurturing the heart is important. And I'm so happy as superintendent to see the day-to-day use of our mindfulness exercises and opportunities for students to connect on an emotional level. And then finally, we have for quite a while, given the fact that we've kind of been able to budget successfully through fiscal challenges and certainly economic challenges, as well as significant enrollment growth, to always look for in the budget process efficiencies and the ability to be creative and innovative in how we think about delivering education, to ensure trust and transparency in terms of reporting and how we use and develop the budget, as well as thinking long-term in terms of maintaining financial stability, as Steve just mentioned, thinking about our reserves over time, and the balance between what I would say is meeting the community's expectations for a quality school system, but being mindful, especially now, on the impact on taxpayers. We know that there's a small percentage of our overall community that are directly attached to the school. However, we know that this community, our communities of Largemont and Mamaroneck, certainly are committed to quality education. That's why we continue to see families move here. And so how do we ensure that we invest in programs and experiences? We support the hiring of what I would say high quality professionals. And at the same time, be certainly mindful of the impact of those who support this through taxes and our taxpayers. So that's really what guides us. And I also wanted to remind the board everything that's gone into the work thus far in developing this budget. The budget process begins with really auditing and assessing our programs and services, to look long range at our budget priorities, to consider program enhancements, to review our programs, to understand the evolving landscape of teaching and learning and think of innovative practices. I would say a perfect example is, the 7 years ago, we went forward with a dual language program, and now that program is in the middle school, and we understand how it touches so many of our elementary and middle school students, and seeing the progress of that program. At the same time, we are always defining our system-wide goals and objectives for the next year or years ahead, and that guides our thinking about resources and expenditures for the budget. We are always mindful of the impact of enrollment. I don't have to talk in great detail about the enrollment growth. Certainly, there's a lot of questions now on kindergarten projections, but we are making certain assumptions based on 3-year averages, and we've been pretty good in terms of at least predicting what incoming kindergarten would look like. We actually, and just looked at actuals, projected end of year expenditures and salary projections as we roll over the budget as part of this project process. And then we seek input from our stakeholders, our department chairs, our building administrators who are developing programs and budgets at their level as well. And we, as I think it's important to point out, is looking at multi-year aims and factors. A perfect example is this past year, we added the 5th grade, this 15 or the 6th grade. And we know that in 2 years from now, we will have a similar size incoming 6th grade cohort. And so how do we look beyond 1 year and invest wisely in our expenditures and our staffing? We finalize and present the recommended budget. We certainly look for the unknown to become known. That is, wait for the state budget to be solidified and approved. We just spent a few minutes looking at revenue projections and expenditures. And ultimately, this budget will be adopted by the board until we seek board recommendations on the way ahead. We have, as you know, in our last 2 meetings, emphasized the fact that we've reduced this budget by 1.4 million. We are now under the cap and have been. I think at our last session, I mentioned to you that the administration feels confident that the budget we've put forward to the board thus far with the adjustments will maintain our programs, will allow us to invest and continue to support the quality of education for our families. So Sylvia, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. This is a slide just showing the components of the changes in the budgets from the prior year. As you can see, most of the increase is from benefits. It's TRS and health insurance. There are also some increases in tuition and related services and transportation. But if you notice, the sum total of the other items are actually going down. These costs are mandated either by state or by contract, and these are what's driving the budget for next year. We looked at this last week, although now we've added a column for 50%. So as Dr. Schaap says, we are putting forth a budget. The current budget column is what is included in the 2021 budget. We are asking for that budget to be adopted because we know we can always reduce the budget, but we can never increase it. So our authorization to spend is limited to what the taxpayers approve. So we know that the governor and the budget director will have changes that they're going to make, the beginning of May, the beginning of July, and maybe even the beginning of next January. And we will have to respond to those. But if we assume that those cuts should already be in the budget and they don't take place, then we won't be able to take advantage of that revenue if it comes in. And we talked about this last week. This is what is in the executive budget, allows the budget director of New York State to respond to decreased revenues or increased expenditures. There are 3 measurement periods, April 1st to the 30th, May 1st to June 30th, and July 1st to December 30th. The budget director has 10 days to adjust its appropriations, the state's appropriations, and that will, reduce or adjust our revenue. What they're going to be looking at is if there is a 1% decrease in revenues or a 1% increase in expenditures and disbursements because they're going on a cash basis, that will give them, that's the trigger to allow them to reduce our state aid. And 1% is just not, doesn't take much. So again, these are the statistics we provided to you last week. The total recommended 2021 budget is $142,609,792. That represents a budget to budget increase of 2.7 million or 1.96%. The tax levy of $128,749,080 represents an increase of $2,225,683 or 1.76%. That is under the tax cap. And then the projected tax rate would be $13.73 per thousand of taxable assessed value. That's an increase of 20 cents or 1.49%. And the estimated increase on an average assessment of $1.25 million is $252. That's it.
Questions?
Any
Comments from the
questions?
board?
No, I just want to just once again, look, thank you guys for operating in extraordinary times, trying to figure this out when in reality, there's no way you can actually figure this out because as Sylvia pointed out, the state budget director tomorrow can say, oh, we're taking X, Y, or Z away from you. But I also want to say, I think what I appreciate as a member of the board and watching you guys in action over these many weeks as this has gone on is that you're really mindful of, we are going to, think about the impact on the community, and that impact on the community is not just the students, but it's everybody in the community that has to pay and to resource our students. I did have one question though on just where we are. I know people sometimes like to think this budget versus the actuals, I think we're fairly close, but maybe you could just talk for a second, Sylvia. I mean, you talked about before when you went through the 1920, but in reality, I think years ago, our budget and our actuals were vastly different, and now it's not that much, if I remember correctly.
Right, the difference, when you look at the difference in the budget to the actuals, aside for this crazy time, they really are just about the use of reserves, right? Because the board in August or July increases the budget for use of these reserves for their intended purposes.
Right.
So if you see the projected increase in unappropriated fund balance, that's really the telling number.
Correct.
And the reason that it is as high as it is because of the potential for savings as a result of closing.
Right. In reality, it's not even that high because it's 2.7 on a $140 million thing. So it's less than 2%. So, and that's in this extraordinary year.
Right. We know it would be different, obviously, if we were to open in May. So you asked, you made a comment, Steve. There are several unknowns at this point. And there's unknowns related to the current year and the actuals through now and through June, the end of June. And then the unknowns that will happen in somewhat over the period of the next 60 days for next year's budget relative to revenue and how we react to that. And I think Sylvia has recommended that, as you said, we can't increase the budget, we can always decrease the budget. So adopting the budget and then watching things, kind of play out in real time gives us flexibility because there are several unknowns. We will find out as we get into the summer what enrollment will look like relative to collapsing or expanding sections, what kindergarten enrollment will be. We want to give ourselves, through this process of an operating budget, to have the flexibility to make adjustments as we can and be able to kind of react to things that are certainly not certain at this point, but are probable. I know that a number of my fellow superintendents today alone have started to talk about planning for possible reductions in program and layoffs between now and when we start in September. And that's the idea of starting to identify where we may have to reduce staffing or cut programs if some of these scenarios play out at the state level.
Bob, just generally, could you just speak to, not asking you to identify specifically what you would be looking at if we do have to make any sort of mid-year adjustments, but what would be your overall philosophy guiding how you make those decisions?
Well, certainly, and it's very similar to how we look at crafting the budget. We want to maintain what I would say, the quality of interactions at the classroom level. That is, how do we focus on teaching and learning? How do we look at some of the broad programs and recognize, for example, we've talked about before, making adjustments to secondary level elective choices and the amount of electives. So looking at class sizes, averages, and trying to make adjustments based on each grade level, each school. When we look at that 10%, 20%, and 50% reduction in revenue, it's safe to say that if we had to address the issue of $1.2 million in less revenue, that it's equivalent to about 8 full-time teaching positions or staffing positions, professional positions. So it really, we sit down together and we look at the entire district, the programs, and say, how do we make strategic cut recommendations and have a level of transparency with the board, obviously, in the community. We wouldn't necessarily come in and say we're going to eliminate all athletics. It's recognizing what is realistic in terms of priorities. There are mandated programs and services that we obviously have to support and adhere to in terms of providing that. So we look from that outer circle to say, what do we hope for and wish for our school system? What can we afford? And I think it's that kind of work.
Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Anybody else on the board have any other questions?
I just I guess one other comment when we're talking about looking at this budget, because as Steve said, I'm very mindful about what our community is going through, both emotionally, health wise, and financial. We've heard of individuals who have lost their jobs. So I'm really mindful of that, and I'm also it's a balancing act. How do you, I think you've done a good job balancing our financial responsibility to taxpayers, recognizing that this budget has gone through many iterations, and, in your meetings with administrators, it's sort of a wish list that you and Sylvia look at, and then, bring it down even further. I remember the years of budget meetings where we had these huge budgets, and then they eventually were whittled down, but we were still seeing tax increases of very high numbers. So, I really appreciate that work, and the costs that could hit us in the fall and the flexibility that you're speaking of. It could also be in the form of additional, I'll call them mandates for lack of a better term. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of being required to perform, enhanced cleaning enhanced cleaning services. The whole notion of, where our kids will be emotionally, and both where they are in their educational journey, because one of the things we've always done is done right by kids in terms of getting them the support they need. So I really am all for that flexibility. And, I do wonder whether, and I'm not asking you to commit to this at this point, whether we would also be using additional fund balance to make for any losses in revenue if we felt that was something that we needed to do.
Well, I just got a quick comment. I mean, we originally planned to remove all use of appropriated fund balance this year. I think, beginning with the commitment on the 400,000 is really reversing that for good reasons. And we always will look to the board and the finance committee to make recommendations. At this point also, there are some unknowns relative to transportation and areas where we may be, certainly be okay relative to what's driving this budget. At the same time, on the other side of it, to your point, we may see more mandated services in the fall and want to be very careful. So at this point, we're not recommending using more fund balance to bring down certainly the impact on the tax level.
Right. And I also want to just say that in terms of where our budget sits, not that we're guided by everything other districts are doing, but the West Putt School Board Association does a survey of where various districts are with their budget increases, and understanding that everybody is dealing with uncertainty and revisiting their budget. So this is just as of last week. And, the first quartile of proposed tax levy changes was sitting at 2.13%. And we are at 1.76%, far below that. So I think you've really looked at this budget, you and Sylvia, very, very carefully.
Any other questions from the board?
Nope.
No more questions, Bob. Just another quick comment. I just want to dovetail off of what Rena said. The amount of iterations I think that you guys have gone through, the amount of work you've done since December. I mean, not only were we in a different place from a budget perspective when we started this process, but we were in a much different place from a world perspective, from a community perspective. So I appreciate the work you, Sylvia, Nora, all the work you've done to really adjust to what is going on currently in our community. And the amazing part is, and I know I'm repeating what others have said, but you'll be able to do this without impacting the student experience, without impacting the amazing education they receive. This is really a great amount of work that is really going to be impactful for the students, and that's making sure that they maintain that education level, maintain that experience level is vitally important to our district. And kudos to you guys for doing that. So I just want to say I appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any other questions? A couple questions did come through on the email, but I want to let any board members, if they have any questions or any comments, comment first.
I'm going to make one final comment. So there, I shared with the head of PT Council earlier today that there are going to be some lobbying opportunities for the community to lobby for additional federal aid. So we will be sending, the board will be sending out a draft letter that the community and I'm sure PTAs will be circulating.
Great.
Thank you, Rena. Okay, well, if nobody on the board has any other questions, I'm just gonna read off a couple questions that we got from the board email. So this is from Tina Maresca. So a couple questions. So is sports and sports transportation reflected in the amounts you have shown as savings for the school year from the second and third slides of the presentation? That's number one. And then number two, what is included in the $343,000 shown for remote learning resources?
So the remote learning resources, I can add a combination of additional technological devices and the cleaning of the buildings. We went through that period, right, Sylvia, or is that separate?
Well, the cleaning was a separate line.
Okay, but it did add to, we spent several weeks ends in a row of really maintaining the higher level of cleaning to address the issue of COVID and trying to maintain a safe learning environment. Remote learning has to do with primarily the purchase of technology to kind of provide our teachers with devices to support the remote learning that's happening, as well as resources and materials for students. So it really speaks to a shift in use of resources to what I would say maintain a level of quality for remote learning and equal access.
And Bob,
And
Also included hotspots for children without internet access.
Yes, includes the purchase of hotspots, deployment of devices, and making sure that we have adequate number of devices based on the deployment, providing devices for our faculty as well.
and the transportation
I would
does
say,
include athletics.
yes, the athletics, Sylvia?
Yes, the transportation does include athletic transportation as well. It's home to school and athletics and field trip, actually.
Okay. Okay, great.
Was remote learning resources also things like Zern Math, or was that somewhere else, those expenses?
There's no expense for Zern Math. Zern Math is free. And we funded the consultant, Amy Vanderwater, largely, virtually entirely just by reallocating existing resources. So no, that's not any of the tech platforms that we've brought in. Patterns of Power, La Lilo, Zern Math are all without charge.
Thank you.
Sylvia, I do have a question. Why do we think that we might have to pay the transportation if they haven't given us the service?
Well, we have been required to pay tuition and some other things, even though our children are not attending the non-public schools that we're paying for. There's been a lot of movement by the transportation companies to get paid because they say they're not going to be able to stay in business, and when we reopen they will not be able to reopen. And then some school districts are paying. We are not required to pay based on our contract, but we did receive a survey a couple of days ago that we completed. So we're thinking that we may have to pay some of it. I'm hoping if we have to pay some of it, it's not all of it, because I believe they've already laid off their employees and they're collecting unemployment. So their costs should be limited, reduced. But this number, Christian, reflects that we do not reopen this year and we do not have to pay any of it.
Right. Okay. And of course, there are small business programs out there that they can also plug
Correct.
into as well, right?
That's my theory.
Okay. Apologies for the dog.
Perfect. All right. And then another question came in. It's a fairly lengthy email. I will read it. Have a little bit of patience here. So So Dr. Shaps and the Board of Education, it has come to our attention that the spring season coaches' salaries will be reduced by 65 to 75%. As representatives of the Merrimack Tiger Stripes Booster Club and parents of spring athletes, we would like to understand how the budget cuts are being distributed across all current extracurricular and spring programs. We recognize the board has had to make difficult decisions in light of recent developments, but we want to ensure that the budget cuts are conducted in an equitable and transparent manner given all these programs. Let's see, during these challenging times, the coaches continue to help our student athletes focus and maintain a sense of normalcy. Please recognize the off-season efforts that do not fall within their in-season competition windows as well as their year-round commitment to their athletes. Why would the Board of Education decide to cut these coaches' salaries that have already been budgeted in the 2019-2020 budget? Has this decision been approved by the Board of Education, finalized, and we look forward to gaining some transparency on the process? This is
So
from
I'd
Pam.
be happy.
Let me just say their names about just as a process. So Pam Nodoff, Allison Tarrant Radovich, and Kate Verney.
So let me start off by saying clearly to the board and to the public, we certainly appreciate the dedication, the commitment, and the expertise of our spring coaches. I would say of all of our coaches, and we recognize how hard they work and the work that's happening in the off seasons and the continuing work to support individual athletes. We know that at the time on March 13th, when we shut down schools, it was the first week, I believe, of the spring season. We just gone through tryouts and had yet to start our modified programs and just started to focus on varsity and JV. Clearly, with the suspension of regular school, we have not continued with the spring sports season. And certainly understanding the board's fiduciary responsibility, and this applies to all existing stipends for the spring. We've made recommendations to set a partial payment. In fact, it was for 35% of the overall stipends for our spring coaches. We recognize that our coaches are tireless in their efforts to support their programs. And I did have the opportunity to actually make a personal call to each of our varsity coaches today, the process, explain the logic. This is consistent with what is happening around our region for good reasons. Districts are all over the place. We hope for return to regular school and a restart of the program, but we are mindful of the fact that certainly at this point, providing a partial stipend is the responsible thing to do. It doesn't take away our admiration, appreciation for the commitment of our coaches. We are applying that same rule, and Jeremy has, for all stipends and spring stipends across the board. So this is reflective of how we're operating in a consistent manner across the system.
Thank you, Bob. So I have no more questions from the community. Any other final board comments or questions, Bob or Sylvia?
Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. So with that in mind, so I will move to future business then. So let's see. So future business, so the announcement. So I've said this before, but of course on Monday, March 30th, 2020, Governor Andrew Cuomo issued an executive order that postpones school board elections until at least June 1st, 2020. And we are waiting further directive as to the timing, location, and manner of voting for the school board and budget vote. As soon as we have clarification in regards to the details of the vote, we will let the community know. We'll move on to upcoming meetings. So Tuesday, May 5th, the time to be announced most likely will be 5:30. The Board of Education meeting topic will be the 2020-21 budget. Tuesday, May 19th, time to be announced, Board of Education meeting topic will be the budget. Tuesday, June 2nd, time to be announced, Board of Education meeting. And once again, the above budget discussion and approval dates are subject to change based upon the date set by the governor for the annual school budget and trustee vote. One final notice, please take notice that until further notice, based upon notices and health advisories issued by federal, state, and local officials and pursuant to Executive Order 202.1 of the Governor of the State of New York, dated March 12th, 2020, Board of Education meeting and budget presentations will be held by the Zoom video conference platform. LMC TV will be streaming the meeting live. You can view it on channel 76 for optimal customers and channel 35 for Fios. You can also go to LMC TV website and click Watch It Now questions regarding items on the agenda can be submitted during the meeting. And in the meeting to board at mamkschools.org. And then, so the Tuesday, May 5th will be the meeting where the board does vote on the budget. So that's Tuesday, May 5th. So that will be the next meeting. All right. So with that, I will motion to adjourn. Thank you once again for everyone. Thank you, LMC TV. You guys did an amazing job as well
Paul?
again. So, oh, go ahead.
Someone has the motion to adjourn in
Oh,
second.
apologize. Yes, I'm sorry.
I motion to adjourn, Sam.
Second.
Second, Ariana.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, LMC TV. Great job. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Night,
Thank you,
everyone. Stay
guys.
well.
Thank you.